Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, one of the last ones that I'm doing, and this one is covering the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets finished with a 54-28 record last year and struggled a little bit more in the playoffs than maybe you would expect a second seed to, barely getting out of the first round against the San Antonio Spurs and then falling to the Portland Trail Blazers in the second round. But it was no doubt a very successful season last year for the Nuggets, and they look to be a strong contender to build on that again this season with very, very few subtractions, at least notable ones, and then a couple of really good additions to add to this team that, like I said, was so successful last year. Starting off in terms of additions is one of my favorite under-the-radar additions of the offseason, and it's Jerami Grant, who the team traded a first-round pick for from the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Grant is he's exactly what this team needed. He's a front court presence that is really good defensively, can play the 4 or even the small ball 5, is versatile, can defend multiple positions, can shoot as well, had really good three-point shooting numbers last year compared to what he had done throughout his career. And even though they have Paul Millsap obviously at the 4, who they brought back, Grant can either be a really good backup for him or even at the 5 spot again in smaller lineups, or potentially start at the 4 for this team. He is so versatile, does so many different things, and I'm really excited to see what he does on this Nuggets team, because even though they might not need his contributions as much as the Thunder did last year, so his per game statistics will likely go down, he's going to be on a very successful team and provide a great role that they definitely need. So one of my favorite under the radar additions for what will likely just be a late first round pick for a player that's going to be hugely impactful, not only throughout the regular season, but specifically in playoff matchups. His defensive versatility is going to be so helpful for this team. And then really the only other addition that I'm technically putting here is Michael Porter Jr., even though obviously he was drafted last year, he didn't play at all, and now he's coming in this year. And I really don't know what to expect out of this guy, because I'm not the kind of person that's going to get super excited over someone that's never played in the NBA, is coming off of a big injury, and really the last time we saw him play legitimate minutes were in high school. He played in a couple of games in college, had some injury issues, and so I'm just not the kind of person that's going to start saying, oh, this guy's going to blow up this year, especially on a team that doesn't really need him to be really good year one to have a really successful season. They were still very good without him last year, but he's obviously very interesting because of what he could be for this team. Extremely talented player, at times considered to be the best high school player in the country, as well as potentially a number 1 overall pick candidate before his injury issues in college. Everybody's going to be keeping an eye on him, but in terms of how he's actually going to help them this year, it's kind of up in the air. One last point before I move on to subtractions. No, I'm not counting Bol Bol in this section. He very well could get minutes for this team depending on how he comes back from the injury issues that he had in college. But as a second round pick, even as exciting as he could be long term and as excited as some people are about him, I'm not including him here. Moving on now to subtractions. There's really not a ton to talk about for this team. They certainly could have lost players like Paul Millsap this offseason that had a team option for like $30 million for him this offseason, and I really expected them to turn that down to kind of build up the rest of their roster, but they were able to bring back everybody and then bring in Jerami Grant as well, so they just decided to pick up Millsap's team option. And then other than that, like, they lost Isaiah Thomas and Trey Lyles, neither of which I'm counting as really significant subtractions for this team. That kind of took a flyer on Isaiah Thomas as a backup point guard and a bench scorer before Monty Morris took off and was one of the better backup point guards in the league, and then Trey Lyles' role has been completely replaced by what Jerami Grant will do this season. So really not concerned about any of the subtractions. Moving on now to the depth chart. For me, as starters, I have Murray, Harris, Craig, Millsap, and Jokic. Then off the bench, Morris, Barton, Beasley, Porter, Grant, and Plumlee. And when you look at it right there, this might be the deepest team in the entire league, because they've got 4 guys that legitimately could start at that 3 spot on opening night throughout the season. I have Craig there simply because he's a good defender, and I think he just does something different than a lot of the other players in their starting group, and I think as long as he can make shots, he's going to be in there because of his defense. But you could also see Will Barton there, or Malik Beasley there, or MPJ there potentially at some point during the season. And then they have such good backups at every other position as well. Like I said, Morris developed into one of the better backup point guards in the league last year. You've got Grant, who I talked about earlier at the 4, and then Plumlee as well at the 5, who fits this team extremely well. Isn't as good of a passer as Jokic, but does some similar things at times as a passing big off the bench. And there's just so many different directions that this team can go. They can play a ton of guards. They can play a little bit bigger. I love all of the depth that they do have on this team. My concerns, however, even though, like I said, they might be one of the deepest teams in the league, I'm a little bit concerned about their defense. Even though it improved last year, it was really good in the beginning of the season and kind of tailed off. Jokic is obviously an outstanding player and improved on the defensive end last year, but is still not close to an elite level defender at the rim, nor is he ever going to be. And then on the perimeter, they don't really have a ton of really good perimeter defenders either. Like I said, I like Craig. I think Beasley could be a good defender. I think Harris could be a good defender. Still kind of up in the air on those guys. And so outside of that, like you've got Jerami Grant, who I think is a good front court defender, as is Paul Millsap. But on the perimeter, when they're going up against some of the better wing and guard scorers in the league, I'm not really sure who's going to be guarding those players. Like I said, Craig is there, Beasley is there, maybe Harris, but those are definitely concerns for me on the defensive end. And then the other issue is just, I'm not really sold on the backcourt combination of Jamal Murray and Gary Harris. They're both good and at times great, more specifically Murray than Harris, who had a down season last year. But when I really think about it, because I think this team is a legitimate title contender, but when I really think about it, do I think that those two guards are going to be the players that are going to lead this team to the NBA Finals? It's possible, but just when I think about it, it just seems very strange to see those two guys leading this team to the finals. So maybe because they have so much depth, it's a situation where they can cash in maybe Harris and some other assets and future first-round picks to get a player like Bradley Beal mid-season and really boost this team's star power and their legitimacy in terms of their backcourt. That would be the only other concern for me, which I'm really nitpicking about this team because I think they're very, very good. But that doesn't mean I don't have concerns about them defensively, as well as just the legitimacy of that backcourt pairing. And I understand that Jokic is so good, that he's such a good playmaker for this team, that they don't really need a super high-level backcourt, and I get that. But again, just as you're looking at their roster, that would be a concern point for me. Moving on now to players to watch, and it's pretty simple. There's two relatively obvious ones. The first one is going to be Michael Porter Jr. Everybody's going to be watching this guy to see how he plays this year. And again, I have no idea what to expect out of him, and people that say that they do are just taking guesses at this point. But it's pretty clear that if we're going to talk about the ceiling of this Nuggets team being raised even further, it's going to be because Michael Porter Jr. ends up becoming an outstanding player. If he becomes a really good wing scorer, maybe even a good defender as well, that changes everything for this Nuggets team, because that's exactly what they do still need. Like I said, when you're looking at the 3 spot, they have a couple of different guys that could start in that spot, but they don't have like a superstar, star caliber wing, and that's really the only thing that they're missing on this team. Now, on the other hand, he could certainly still continue to struggle with injuries and not provide this team a ton this year, which really wouldn't be a huge deal. They have plenty of other options at the 2 and the 3 spot to where they don't necessarily need him to be really good or even be a rotation player in what will be his rookie season. But everybody obviously knows that if you're going to talk about where this team could be as one of the best teams in the league, maybe a top 2 team in the entire league, it's going to be because Michael Porter Jr. ends up becoming a really good player. So obviously, people are going to be keeping an eye on him. And then the other guy is Jerami Grant, and he's on here because, like I said, he's one of my favorite additions of the entire offseason. I think he just changes everything about what they can do in the front court on this team. It's essentially like having Paul Millsap on the floor, at least from a defensive and spacing perspective. It's basically like having Paul Millsap on the floor for all 48 minutes, because one of those two is going to be on the floor basically the entire game. And Millsap was actually really impactful for them in the postseason once he got healthy, just because he's so versatile, can defend well, can rebound, and can shoot. And like I said, Jerami Grant can do all those things and is an even better athlete than Millsap is, and even could play some small ball 5. And I think that was one of the issues with this Nuggets team, is obviously they were very good last year, but once they got to the postseason, they didn't really have a ton of different lineup combinations that they could go to. And I think that's something that they've remedied simply by bringing in someone like Jerami Grant. So if you're looking at the Nuggets as a potential championship contender like I am, then don't be surprised at all if Jerami Grant is a guy that plays a key role for this team, not just during this season, but in the postseason as well. And last up now, let's talk about the expectation and prediction for this Nuggets team. For me, I definitely think that they are a title contender. I think that's a legitimate expectation given how good they were last year, given the fact that they didn't really lose anybody, and Michael Porter Jr. and Jerami Grant are significant additions, or new additions, I guess, for this team. In terms of predictions, I've got them at 56 to 60 wins and a top 5 team in the NBA. I'm very high on this team. I think they're going to win a lot of games in the regular season. I think they're going to be a legitimate threat in the Western Conference. Jokic is going to be an MVP candidate, and I just love all of the things that they did in the offseason. They didn't have a ton of moves, but every move they made sense and created a team that I think is probably the deepest in the entire league. And as long as guys, younger guys like Murray and Michael Porter Jr. and Harris step up. They won't need to make any kind of move to be a title contender. I just think that in my mind, I would feel better about them making the finals if they had, a more proven backcourt player than Murray and Harris. But even then, like I said, if they need to make that move, they certainly can. They do have some minor defensive issues to work out, and I really don't know how exactly their 3 spot is going to end up. But at the end of the day, I think when playoffs roll around, this is going to be such a versatile team, such a deep team that can do so many different things, that as long as they stay healthy, they're going to have as good a shot as any team in the Western Conference to represent that conference in the NBA Finals. They wouldn't necessarily be my pick, which I'll get to later in a different video, but I think they're definitely way up there in terms of contending not only to make the finals, but potentially the #1 seed in the Western Conference as well. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.